Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and well, you couldn't make this up, could you? We have the full-on frothing hard Brexit government in power, and yet find ourselves in a world where the EU's borders are tighter than those in the UK. But first, if you'd like to stay notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So this has been said before, and you'd think it's going to have to be said again before this is all over. One of the main lines of attack in the Brexit misinformation campaign was the concept that the UK's borders were very leaky and that this was due to being a member of the EU. Of course, it was nonsense to anyone who actually checks those facts out. In fact, the UK's borders and immigration systems were a lot more open than most EU members. This is because they were down to UK government policy, not that of the EU. But more recently, this has been shown to be completely ludicrous, even if you went along with that lie before. Because the news, even mainstream news, has been coming out for over a week that various EU member states have been restricting or even fully closing their borders with other EU countries. But how can this be if the EU want open borders, cry the Brexit supporters? Because the EU don't have any say in how a country wants to operate its borders, especially in times of emergency. That's a matter for national governments. But now we have the quite insane situation whereby EU countries are tightening up their borders, but the UK isn't. It was silly enough when we just saw the EU countries adopting whatever border measures they felt necessary. That was just exposing a Brexit lie. But now we have a situation whereby the UK government isn't really doing anything. So when this crisis first started blowing up, people were posting footage and photos of the trips through British airports from overseas with no real health checks going on. You know, the sorts of thing you get at certain airports, where people have come in from countries where this crisis has hit more fully, thermometer on the forehead types of thing. Nothing. No, not in London's airports. Now we have the situation where France are warning that it may have to severely restrict the border with Britain if we don't start putting real lockdown measures in place. So you've got this situation, we've got all these Brexiteers saying, oh, we should close the borders, It's actually the EU who are actually closing the borders and the UK who are not. Because for all the worrying about numbers coming out of various continental countries at the moment, which are ahead of the curve compared to the UK, those countries are doing their best to restrict that growth. And you can see how overwhelming it is still for many of them, in particular Italy, of course. We initially had a policy of letting the infection run rampant in the hopes of getting it over and done with, this herd immunity idea. More recently, our government has accepted the notion that this was utterly insane, and we are now trying to play catch up, but we're still trying to be as reckless as we think we can get away with. When I say we, I mean the British government, really. They're trying to be as reckless as they think they can get away with. They're still not really coming to their senses over this. But the upshot of all this is that the infection is under much less control in the UK. Even though we're still on the flattish part of the curve, it is surely going to steepen up very, very quickly now. Compared to other countries in Europe, much less control in the UK. Now, given that even the lockdown that's happening in some of those other countries is not making the infection easy to deal with, just more manageable, the last thing those countries want is a second wave arriving due to visitors from a country that is not adopting those measures. So France has said that if the UK don't adopt similar lockdown measures to the more sane countries, then they may face no choice other than to restrict access to people from Britain. And this isn't about holidaymakers, who should not even be a thing right now. This would presumably directly impact our ability to trade quite significantly, because if we struggle to export because we've got delays at borders, then that would be a massive blow to our economy, as if it weren't already going to be facing a beasting regardless. But also remember on how much we depend on imports. Toilet rolls, medicines, fresh fruit, vegetables, all essentials, not luxuries. We're not talking about luxuries here. We're not talking about Prosecco or like having to do without my Parmesan. No. Essentials. And all dependent upon frictionless trade with the EU, especially across the border between the south of England and the north of France. And for those who think that the UK government is moving towards real social distancing, don't worry, because he's announcing these things. We'll be fine. We're complying. Bear in mind their language so far. It has taken the form of telling people to avoid certain activities, but not actively ordering people. So, for example, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, says don't go to pubs, but he doesn't order pubs to close. And then we have national television showing the Prime Minister's father saying that he will ignore that advice anyway, and he's going to go to the pub. And don't get me wrong, I understand how difficult it is for particularly a Brexit government to get this right. They spent all these years trying to liken living in the EU with Second World War privations, and yet now where are we? Rationing and having to restrict people's movements. But the governments of other European democracies have had no problem implementing these measures. And bear in mind, especially in France, when the people of France do not like what their government has done, they are not shy about saying so. When I say there's no problems with how other European governments have done it, what I mean is there's no political problems. Because they've communicated clearly with their public, they've been open and honest and clear and have acted consistently with the scientific advice. And we will move towards that. We started off this crisis trying to get the view that our ministers knew better than the whole world's experts. They do not. As a result, we know that the common measures that sensible countries have been taking will have to be taken in the UK as well. But remember, for every day we delay, there are consequences. This isn't like, oh, well, better late than never. I mean, yes, it will be better late than never, but it will still be a pretty dire situation, the fact that we've delayed for as long as we have. And if we end up in a situation where it really does run out of control, even if we do then adopt those measures, if it is seen as rather a case of locking the stable door after the horse has bolted, then we may still find those border restrictions, which will make the situation much, much worse. Because, as I say, if we even have delays on importing certain things that we need, not just want, but need, we are in real trouble. As if we weren't already. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then also please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.